call a roll.
Senator Alvarado.
Here.
Senator Harper Angel. Senator McDaniel. Senator McGarvey. Senator Schroeder. Here. Senator Southworth.
Here.
Senator Storm. Senator Thayer.
Here.
Senator Wheeler. Present. Senator Nemus.
Present.
Senator Mills.
I'm here, and Senator Storm just walked in. Very good. Thank you, committee members, for taking the time here at lunchtime to do this committee meeting. Gentlemen online, we have three individuals. Michael Dossett, who's the director of Division of Emergency Management, Mr. John Hicks, who's the State Budget Director, and Mr. Jim Gray, who's the Transportation Cabinet Secretary. And today's meeting is concerning a discussion on the disaster response to the tornadoes in Western Kentucky. And as we're all familiar, today we presented our Senate Bill 5 to A&R today regarding financial disaster relief for that part of the state, which is near and dear to my heart. Before we get started, I just want to make one observation. The Senate rules this session are that all of our committee testimony will be in person. We made an exception today due to the gentleman that we invited and their schedule, to accommodate their schedule and to be able to get an up-to-date remarks from them, which I think are very, very important. Just to give a little background on some of the things that we're going to talk about today, when we were crafting Senate Bill 5, had several discussions with local officials in Western Kentucky and counties that I was communicating with, and it just seemed like there was some small disconnects between communication and coordination, what local responders and local elected officials knew, and how to communicate with state and FEMA directors. So thought it would just be good to try to kind of get us all in one room, get us all on one page, and try to make sure that state government is communicating with our locals at the very highest level during this important time. So the directors online actually have these 8 questions that are in front of you today on the packets. And I would just kind of open it up for Director Hicks. You're on the screen right now. I don't know if you want to start or not, but allow you guys to kind of make some opening statements. And then if you could answer these questions that you have in front of us and kind of editorialize on them, and then we will take some questions afterwards. And if you can hold your questions for them until after their presentations, we'll have plenty of time for questions. So, gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is John Hicks. I appreciate you having us here today. I'll tell you what, we're going to lead off with Director Dossett, and then followed up with Secretary Gray, and then I will follow him.
Very good. Director Dossett.
Director
Dossett, we cannot hear you.
Computer glitch.
There you go. We got you now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. Thank you for your time today. I'd just like to go over a brief summary of the event. The event occurred on the 10th. I've been with the agency over a decade. I've been in this position over 8 years, and in our recorded history, this is the worst impact the state of Kentucky has ever suffered. This tornado event was categorized as an EF4, and it achieved winds of 190 miles an hour. There are over 2,000 homes that were damaged across multiple counties. An estimated 125,000 homes were without power that night. Thank you to all of our county elected officials, our emergency management, and all the emergency services groups that responded that night. I can tell you that I was in the state EOC in the early morning hours, along with Governor Andy Beshear. He engaged the counties that we could contact, our elected officials, by Zoom, getting up to the minute reports on what the damage was. On the 11th, that day, we asked for and received an emergency declaration, and that gave direct federal assistance to the major impact counties that lost homes and certainly residents in those areas. On the following day, we asked for an expedited major declaration. So where it stands today is we have 16 counties included in individual assistance. 6 of those counties are scripted and currently in the process of receiving FEMA direct housing assistance. And I'll go over the 2 differences between direct housing assistance and state sponsored task force that is working on sheltering. So the 6 counties that receive FEMA assistance for direct housing are Warren, Muhlenberg, Marshall, Hopkins, Graves, and Caldwell. We have 23 counties overall that are included in public assistance for the declaration. So currently, we have still have a number of federal teams on the ground. FEMA has in excess of 500 personnel in theater across a variety of counties. We also were assisted by our EMAC support from our sister states, and those included South Carolina, Florida, Virginia, Delaware, Nebraska, Ohio, New York, Massachusetts, Michigan, and several additional. We also have a large contingent of American Red Cross. So with that, in response to your questions, I'll start out with question number 1, explaining the chain of command. So during a state of emergency, the Division of Emergency Management, and specifically I answer to the governor, the governor's office, and then it is delegated through my chain, through 2 deputy directors, down to our area managers. We have 10 area managers, and they are located across all counties throughout the state. In this particular situation, we dispatched a single area manager to each of the 6 impacted counties that were hit the hardest. We established a one-to-one relationship. So in addition to a FEMA representative, and in most of them, an Army Corps of Engineer representative, we have an area manager. They're in contact and on the ground daily with our elected officials in the county and with the local EM director. So that has gone on since the beginning of the event. Emergency management sits in command and control over all cabinet responses, and we basically do the response and recovery operations throughout the entirety of the event. So our area managers, again, overlapped the 6 primary counties, and they continue to do that type of liaison. The next question is about communities with KYM liaison. And essentially, we have 10 public assistance representatives from the Division of Emergency Management on the ground with the elected officials in these 16 counties. These are primarily individual assistants, but they also have they're also included in the public assistance. So it's a very sophisticated operation. Many of our counties are well versed in how this works. Some of them are not, and that's understandable. Again, this is the largest event we've had in history. So we have a variety of public assistance officials out in the counties, walking them through the process of applying for aid through FEMA. So a question on liaison and an advisory capacity. Our Kentucky emergency management area managers and our staff are available to make decisions on behalf of KYM. Certainly the disasters and the decisions are made at the local level with our elected officials. So the next question is, when FEMA comes to a large disaster with multiple cities and counties involved, what is their presence on the ground? So there are, I believe, 10 supervisors on the ground, between 5 and 10 supervisors. And again, they're part of the liaison team with the elected official and our local emergency management director. They have DSAT teams. These are disaster survivor assistance teams. These are the folks that you have seen literally going door to door, registering our survivors for FEMA assistance. They also have opened DRCs. These are disaster registration centers. They also have had mobile centers. These are called MERICs, but the mobile centers take walk-in registrations and they rotate. They rotate locations. So overall, currently, I believe FEMA has 567 personnel in theater. 260 are dedicated just to disaster survivor assistance, and then 160 are dedicated to individual assistance. That's a large contingent. I will tell you that in terms of other major disasters in other cities, we are ahead of the curve. FEMA was very, very quick in responding. In fact, we had some teams on the ground, the leadership of the teams on the 11th, the evening of the 11th. We asked for some major assistance from USAR. These are urban search and rescue teams that are funded by the federal government. And obviously they came to Mayfield and worked on the candle factory collapse. So again, it's important to understand that we work on a one-to-one relationship. And it's basically the collated team of federal and state in liaison with our elected officials and our local EM managers in all of these counties. So the question is, how does the financial assistance flow from FEMA to KYM? The process is identical. The process doesn't change in any way from the previous disasters. And obviously, we're still working the disaster in February for the ice storm and in March 2021 for the major flood. This one by far dwarfs any of the other responses, but the protocols are basically the same. It begins with an applicant agent. The county determines who the applicant agent is. Many times they use a contractor. Sometimes it's the judge executive. Again, many of our counties have gone through this process quite a number of times, so they have that down pat. And basically, FEMA assigns a program manager to each county and to the applicant agent. Together, they roll up and identify damages, and these are primarily public assistance projects. So they write the project. FEMA assists in doing that. FEMA then approves and obligates dollars for the project. And then once the project begins, FEMA allocates funding that is kept in a holding account for each county for each project. They are currently writing projects that are expedited. Certainly our counties, our partners are incurring large expenses due to debris removal and a variety of other issues. Expedited projects can access funding between 30 and 60 days. FEMA is working diligently at this process, and we're certainly assisting them with our PA representatives out representing our county partners. This is a very quick turnaround in terms of disaster projects. Many times it requires a number of months to write the project, and then funding is based on completion of work. In this disaster event, many counties are choosing to do expedited projects, and we're certainly assisting in that. So the next question deals with temporary housing in FEMA trailers. It's important to understand that there are two pieces to this, this response. There is the FEMA response with travel trailers, and they're both predicated on the same steps. The response includes rental housing, rental apartments, and the last choice is travel trailers. In many of our cities, there are no rental homes available. There are no apartments available. So obviously the choice will be to move forward with travel trailers. Now this is inclusive of the FEMA direct housing assistance process. The state has begun what is called the Kentucky Disaster Housing Task Force. And there are a number of our partners that are engaged in the task force. And they include the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, the Kentucky Department for the Kentucky Department for Local Government, also two additional areas of our cabinet. The Red Cross is a part of that. Habitat for Humanity is a part of that. So within this task force, with our county partners, including the Kentucky Housing Corporation, we're basically putting together a number and a series of options. One of the options in this task force is a sheltering mission. And the sheltering mission for the state will also involve the three-tiered process: rental housing, rental apartments, and travel trailers. We are in the process for purchasing our travel trailers. We have just recently received data from FEMA that we'll be examining for those that are eligible for the sheltering process. And again, to point out, they're separate missions. FEMA is looking for direct housing. The state is hosting a sheltering mission. So we're moving very quickly through that process. So the next question deals with what does it look like in our communities of Mayfield, Dawson Spring, Casey, Bremen, Bowling Green, etc. We're moving forward with non-congregate sheltering, and that is the term that the state's process is called. It is non-congregate sheltering, and I will say to you that this is a very unusual option. The state of Kentucky is only the third state in the country that has been allowed to enter into non-congregate sheltering as a program. So that allows us to purchase travel trailers. In a non-COVID environment, that option is not available. So the first state that did that is Texas. The second one was Louisiana. We have looked at both of their programs. We've leaned heavily on Louisiana for lessons learned and how the program works. So we're in that process. And obviously construction and rebuilding will be part of that. The major part will be restoration of infrastructure and utilities. And FEMA is working toward making eligibility decisions for their individual assistance. So with that, I'll ask Secretary Gray to talk a little bit about how that will work in terms of the sheltering mission.
Well, thank you, Director Dossett. And Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me just for a moment to acknowledge and thank Director Michael Dossett, because his leadership has been from the very beginning, as he described, from the very night and that early morning at the EOC, has been vigorous and has been admirable in every respect. And it's been a real honor that the Transportation Cabinet has been able to work with Kentucky Emergency Management and the other partners in this project. Let me dial back, like the director did, to the night and the morning of December the 11th, and tell you just a bit of a human interest stories, a couple of stories that will illustrate the work of the men and women who were on the ground that night, and the work of the communities and the cooperation that was experienced. Denitra Henderson is, as many of you know, as many of the members know, the chief engineer, the chief district engineer in each of our 12 districts is the lead. Denitra Henderson is the lead in District 2, which is centered in Madisonville. And Denitra told me on the morning of the 11th that her teams were out before dawn, clearing the major routes so first responders could get to the scene. And her teams were met with community members, with farmers, with their tractors, and citizens with their trucks and their chainsaws. And this forgive me, but this sense of community was what Denitra was, of course, so impressed with and was an inspiration for everyone. I happen to be in Mayfield and Dawson Springs and Bowling Green. I've already been 3 times and 5 days. And on the on the Sunday following the event, the tornadoes. In Dawson Springs, I was met by Judge Jack Whitfield. Many of you know Judge Whitfield in Hopkins County. And we were in Dawson Springs where so much destruction had occurred. And standing there with Jack, with Judge Whitfield, was Steve Henry, judge from Webster County, and Adam Onan from Union County, all of them, in their overalls and their work boots. And so was Mayor Kevin Cotton from Madisonville, all working together, lending a hand in these difficult times. Now, what we know today about debris removal, I wanted to share with you beyond just the housing issues, the temporary housing issues. What we know about debris removal to date is, and the director has these numbers from just yesterday, is we have debris removal has resulted in almost 800,000 cubic yards of material removed. And that represents roughly 27% of the total U.S. Army Corps of Engineers estimate. So that number is progressing steadily. We've had good progress. There's always room for improvement. We all know that, but we've had good and solid progress. Now, in terms of our temporary housing, and the director, as I said, he knows this backwards and forwards and has illustrated that to you all already. But in terms of our immediate work that we're doing through the Transportation Cabinet's mission, if you will, has been expanded to the temporary initiative. And what that represents is, let me give you an example. So Kyle Pote is our chief district engineer in District 1, which includes Graves County. Kyle's been working with the FEMA representatives and with the Red Cross representatives and has been collecting data himself through his team on the ground locally from the schools and from the school systems and from the utility companies in order to determine the parents first, the parents with children who have been displaced, so that we would be able to identify those who are most needing of the sheltering through the campers, for example. So we will be cross-referencing all of this data in order to determine those who are most eligible and most needing as early as possible. Director Dossett, have I missed something here? You're good at supplementing and adding and confirming. Have I missed a part of it?
The first thing I'd like to supplement is Secretary Gray somewhat undersells what the Transportation Cabinet has done in this disaster. They were the first on the scene doing debris removal. Before the Army Corps of Engineers were consulted, when the wind stopped blowing, they were down there and taking on this second mission and probably many others to come. Thank you, sir, for that. The temporary housing mission is so important that we're working through it as a task force. I think in the coming days, we'll be able to move families into units as quickly as in coming weeks. So I don't think you left anything out, sir, and thank you for all of the efforts.
Yes, sir. Okay, I think we can then turn it over to Director Hicks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for having us today. And I want to say one of your questions is, what can the Kentucky legislature do to help expedite the recovery effort? And Senate Bill 5 and House Bill 5 are one of the first things, that the General Assembly can help contribute, to this effort. And so we appreciate working with members of the General Assembly on this legislation, to assist Kentucky's, Western Kentucky impacted communities. We had a couple of bill drafting sessions, particularly with the chairman of the House Appropriations and Revenue Committee earlier on prior to the filing of the House Bill and Senate Bill 5. And there come a few things and observations that I want to make about that. And so, many of the types of costs that we had offered and proposed to be covered are in the bills. And there are a few improvements and items that we've learned since that I want to mention. The first is process. As drafted now, only 45 million of the 200 million total appropriation is only available until there are subsequent requests made of the General Assembly to be operationalized through special appropriations bills to be enacted. And then there are the many months, as Director Dossett said, after adjournment of the regular session, because these projects go on for months and sometimes years. And so as it relates to process, with every disaster, there are expenditures that the Commonwealth incurs, and the size and scope varies with each disaster. But they are what is determined necessary by the governor and emergency management, and they are acted on, immediately. And these are costs that are expected to be reimbursed by FEMA, but you never know on the front end if everything is going to be ultimately reimbursable. And so we would prefer, to be able to have enough allocated appropriations in the bill, to cover, I don't want to call them routine expenditures, but they're normal. They're the kinds of expenditures that emergency management authorizes working with each county and working with FEMA. And we can provide an estimate, say for of the next 12 months. It could be on the order of $15 to $20 million to cover that estimate. So we'd like to work with the General Assembly, as it relates to not only that issue, but the process of coming to the General Assembly for subsequent allocations, and also further work with the members on, how to implement the recovery needs upon adjournment of the General Assembly. But a few other items that I want to mention, in addition to the eligible uses. One thing an emergent issue that came even after we had initial talks with members was that straight line fencing for farms, is an uninsured item in many cases. And so the assistance to agriculture, is an important item that came even after we had come up with an initial draft. We also had in our initial proposal some economic development, modifying the economic development incentive projects, much like we did for the Ford battery plant projects during the special session, to allow a net present value incentive process, typically, particularly for those the most impacted counties. And we were aiming at Graves and Hopkins. And so it was just a little tweak. It's not an expenditure of funds, but it is an ability to have some front end assistance and economic development assistance there. And then another area that we don't think is robust enough is the issue of revenue losses to cities and counties and school districts who are most affected by the tornadoes. There are provisions in the bill, good ones that we proposed and were agreed to, for advancing to cities and counties when their fiscal liquidity is strained due to the expenses or outlays they may make awaiting insurance proceeds or awaiting FEMA reimbursements. And to ensure school districts in the bill, doesn't default on bond payments. That's in there. But we expect that some of those areas will experience a loss of revenues due to the destruction of residences and businesses, that their governments count on. And of course, local governments rely heavily on property taxes and occupational taxes. And I'll give you one example. Those two tax types are over half of the Graves County revenues for the fiscal court, and over a third in Hopkins County. So those are a few things that we think we'd like to continue discussions with members. But we appreciate the efforts, Mr. Chairman, of Senate Bill 5 and House Bill 5. I think it's a collective effort of everybody to provide assistance in a timely way to our communities down in Western Kentucky. We thank you for having us today.
Very good. I appreciate the presentation and the communication here. We've got about maybe 10 or 15 minutes for questions, and then we'll wrap it up here. I'm going to yield to members, but I've got several questions. But see if are there any members that have questions right now? Any questions or concerns? I'll just go ahead and ask a few. Director Dossett, probably one of the biggest. So let me kind of review this and make sure I'm hearing you right. There are 6 areas that kind of are major disaster areas that you have listed, and in each one of those areas there should be a FEMA manager, a Corps manager, and a Kentucky Emergency Management manager for each one of those areas. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
That is correct. And if in y'all's communication and when you talk to these folks, if you could just make sure that local county judges and mayors know who those folks are and have their phone numbers and know how. Now, are these folks on the ground, or are they in and out of the community, or how do they work right now?
They're on the ground, sir, and sometimes we're in communication multiple times a day. So
Okay.
This is a unified response, and it has. We've been actually we began hosting calls every single day of the event, and they were 2 calls a day. We did a 10 a.m. and a 2 p.m. So we certainly can recheck the telephone numbers and the availability. As some of these folks rotate, Kentucky Emergency Management personnel do not. They are permanent assignments, and they're literally linked at the hip with the local EM director.
Okay.
But we can certainly revisit that again, sir.
And I think the confusion was more on the FEMA side than Kentucky Emergency Management, because I think there's so many FEMA officials that they're in contact with that there may be some confusion, like who is my main FEMA guy that I can reach out to, and I would request that. As far as the temporary housing, so in a summary, FEMA is working to get temporary housing toward these communities as well as the state is. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. And the direct housing FEMA assistance program are in the 6 counties that were identified in the declaration. The state program centers on those 6 counties, but it could be available to other smaller communities or those that are in need. Okay. And again, it is important to differentiate. The FEMA program is housing, and the state program is sheltering.
Right. So the $15 million that is being appropriated through Senate Bill 5, is that going toward the sheltering mission, and then the FEMA is a direct expense by the federal government to get temporary housing into the area?
That is correct, Senator. The $15 million appropriated will purchase 200 travel trailers for the state sheltering mission. Yes, sir.
Okay. And could you expand on the process of these 200 from the state program? These 200 trailers, are they going to be located in clumps? Maybe 10 or 20 of them together, or what is the plan there? What is y'all's plan involve?
I'll first talk about some of the process, and then I'll ask Secretary Gray to talk about how it will play out on the ground, on pads in the counties. Transportation Cabinet, again, is picking up maybe the largest piece of the implementation of the program out in the counties. So it begins with identifying the applicants. And again, we're just in receipt of the FEMA data. It contains PI information. We have to work through collating the families that show the greatest need, that have school children that need to be in the community. And we work down through that through an interview process, very similar to how FEMA is doing it. And once those families are identified, then we look inside the community. And again, the 3-tiered process is available rental housing, rental apartments, and then travel trailers. Of course, in our 3 or at least 2 or 3 of the hardest hit communities, there's very little infrastructure left for rentals. So we'll move quickly to that. And then I'll ask Secretary Gray to talk a little bit about the logistics.
You're on mute, Secretary.
Thanks, John. Mr. Chairman, so what our scope includes today is examining sites that are available in the communities most affected, with a focus on at the initial phase, the focus on parents with children in schools. And what that means is, for example, I mentioned Kyle Pote, who's our chief engineer in District 1, which includes Graves County. And Kyle and he has two of his branch engineers, also engineers, who live in Mayfield. And I'm giving this as an example. So what they have done is they have discussed with the school system, the parents that are most in need and the children that are most in need of the sheltering. And they've also cross-referenced that data with information and data from the utility companies, where they know that utilities have been compromised. So with this information, then they are able to identify locations for the possible locations of the campers. Just an example, a couple of locations have been identified. And again, I'm mentioning Mayfield and Graves County, but a couple of locations have been identified where we could place as many as 20, 30, or 40 campers. Now they have, part of that process includes the planning, includes confirming that utilities are available, and then the construction of the locations. But also bear in mind that some of these locations will be perhaps on pads where a residence may have existed and been compromised or even destroyed. So it's as the director says, it's a work in progress. This planning is underway. I'm confident of the staff and the people that are engaging this work. They're the same ones that were out before dawn on the 11th. And they're the same ones that are out in snow and ice conditions. So that's where we are. The director can talk about where we are with the location identification of the campers.
And the other thing I would add, Mr. Chairman, is this process will be replicated in Dawson Springs, in Bremen,
Yes.
and all of our hard-hit impact communities.
Right. Okay. And just to follow up on that, do we have a number of for FEMA? Have they given you a number on what they think they're trying to directly allocate on their efforts for trailers coming in?
They have published numbers. At this point, they've reviewed applications from survivors, and they have collated that down to about 487, I believe. And of those, again, they'll look through the three-stage process. It's rental, and then a housing trailer. They've not announced how many that they have distilled who will actually get trailers yet. They're still working on that process.
Right. But we could imagine it might be in the hundreds. Is that correct?
I would say it could be, sir, but I wouldn't expect it will be 487 because their process goes through all 6 of those counties. And in some of the areas, there are rental options available. So it could be several hundred, but I'm really unable to predict that number.
I understand. Senator Wheeler, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may have missed this, but approximately how many folks in total do you have that have been displaced at this point by these disasters?
Well, we have about 13,300 that have registered with FEMA. We actually have estimated, and again, we haven't been able to get on the ground in every single community with FEMA to do the actual, this residence is destroyed and this one is a major damage. They categorize the two largest areas as destroyed and majors, but that number is estimated at least 21 to 2,200 residences overall, and that would be primarily in the 6 hardest hit counties, but could extend to 16 counties.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And Director Ossett, we are running up against our time. I have one more area of a couple of questions related to debris removal. So can you cover, the first 30 days of debris removal is covered. I understand the county officials received a letter that there was a little bit of flexibility there. But can you talk about your future plans on debris removal 60 and 90 days out?
Certainly, and I can shed some light on the most recent decision by FEMA. The governor asked for a 60-day extension to the first 30 days. That was declined. However, they did allow the governor to use a sliding scale for category A, which is debris removal, and category B, which is emergency measures, which includes purchase of trailers, use of teams, etc. So on the debris removal, I know the governor is reaching out to all of our elected officials in these impact counties to see what their greatest cost was in what time frame. So that 30 days can move either left or right to incorporate the largest expense from the aggregate number of counties, and to include the Corps of Engineer expense. The Corps of Engineers for remediation of debris in graves runs about 30 million every month.
Yeah, it's a big number, and it's a concern for our counties and county judges on how to meet that 25% gap if it's still going over 30 days. Gentlemen, I thank you. Is there any other questions from the committee before we go? Okay. Well, I think what we were aiming for was to get communication between the administration and the Senate as far as what's going on with the emergency disaster, and it sounds like things are moving forward. I would just encourage you guys to continue the work that you're doing in communicating and coordinating with our local officials, and thank you so much for your testimony today. And if there are not any other questions,